My boyfriend picked up my dog and carried him to the front door and put him outside in the rain. Not in the yard, not under the covered porch. Outside, on the front step, in the middle of a November rainstorm that had been going since midnight, with the door closed behind him and the porch light off. He did it while I was in the shower. He did it because he thought I wouldn't find out until morning, by which point he had a plan for what he was going to say about it. What he didn't know was that I found out 11 minutes later. What he didn't know was what Max did while he was out there in the rain, in the dark, on the front step of a house he had lived in for 3 years. And what he absolutely couldn't have predicted was what the morning brought. Not just for him, not just for me, but for every single thing I thought my life was at that point. I want to tell you this story because I think it needs to be told. Not for drama, though there is plenty of that. Not for revenge, though what happened has a satisfying justice to it that I'm not going to pretend I don't appreciate. But because the real story here is about a dog who showed me something I needed to see, at exactly the moment I needed to see it, in the only way he knew how. His name was Max, and by morning, because of him, everything was different. Let me take you back to where it started. Max was 4 years old when this story happened, and he had been mine since he was 8 weeks and small enough to carry in one arm. He was a border collie mix, the mix being something athletic and slightly unpredictable, probably some kind of shepherd. And he had the border collie brain that makes living with border collies one of the more intellectually demanding pet ownership experiences available. He was the smartest animal I had ever known, and I say that with the full awareness that it sounds like the thing all dog owners say about their dogs. With Max, it was measurably true in a way that sometimes made me feel slightly outpaced by my own pet. He learned things in ways that seemed to bypass normal training. He understood context and sequence with a precision that occasionally unnerved people who didn't know him. He communicated in a layered, specific way, not just the broad signals of a happy or sad or hungry dog, but refined, particular communications that, once you learned to read them, were remarkably clear. A specific look for, "You're going to be late." A different look for, "Something outside requires your attention." A third look for, "I need you to follow me right now," which he used sparingly enough that when he used it, you knew it was serious. He was also, and I want to be clear about this because it matters for understanding everything that followed, one of those dogs who loves one person. Not exclusively. He was warm and friendly and well socialized and perfectly pleasant with other humans. But the love he had for me was of a different category. It was the love of a creature who has decided, with the full force of its considerable intelligence, that one person is its person, and has organized its life and awareness accordingly. I had been his person since he was 8 weeks old. He'd been mine since the same moment. The house we lived in. The house where this story happens. I had been renting for 4 years. It was a 3-bedroom in a quiet residential street. More house than I needed alone, but priced in a way that made it manageable. And I had filled it gradually with the accumulated objects and arrangements of a life that was mostly working. I was 29, working in graphic design, doing reasonably well by the metrics that 29 measures well by. And then there was Daniel. Daniel had moved in 8 months before this story. We'd been together for 14 months. He had moved in after 6, and the moving in had felt, at the time, like the right progression of a relationship that was going well. He was 32, worked in finance, had the kind of confidence that comes from being good-looking and competent and generally accustomed to things working out. He was funny when he was in a good mood, which he usually was. He was attentive in the early months, which he became less reliably so as the months accumulated. He had opinions about things, strong ones, held with the certainty of someone who had rarely had his opinions seriously challenged. And one of his opinions, which emerged gradually over the 14 months we were together, was about Max. Daniel did not dislike dogs as a category. He was careful to establish this. He had grown up with dogs, he said. He liked dogs in their proper place, he said. The proper place, as it gradually emerged, was one that did not involve a border collie mix who weighed 55 pounds sleeping on the bed or sitting on the couch or following the energy of the house with those sharp, measuring brown eyes. Max, for his part, had never warmed to Daniel in the way he warmed to people he decided were safe. He was polite. Max was always polite. His socialization was excellent. But he watched Daniel with a quality of attention that was different from how he watched people he trusted. More alert, less relaxed, the specific watchfulness of a very smart dog who has made an assessment and is monitoring whether the assessment needs to be revised. I noticed this. I told myself it was adjustment, that Max would come around as Daniel became more embedded in the household. Dogs needed time with new people. It would resolve. It didn't resolve. It solidified. The complaints about Max started at month 3 of Daniel living in the house. They started small, the kind of thing you can present as reasonable concern rather than agenda. The dog hair on the furniture, the smell after rain walks, the early morning energy that border collies have as a genetic feature and which Daniel found unreasonable. I addressed each complaint as it came. I bought a better vacuum. I got a mat for the door and towels for after-rain walks. I started taking Max for an earlier pre-Daniel wake-up run so his morning energy would be mostly spent before Daniel wanted quiet. I did these things because I was trying to make a shared homework, which is what you do. But I was also aware, in a quiet place I wasn't examining too closely, that these were all accommodations for Max that moved in one direction, toward him taking up less space, being less present, impacting Daniel's experience of the house less. Max was not the one being asked to adjust. Month 5, Daniel suggested Max should sleep in the laundry room rather than the bedroom. I said no. The conversation that followed was the first one about Max that I would classify as a real fight rather than a discussion, and it ended with Daniel backing down, but with something in the atmosphere of the house that hadn't been there before. Month 6, Daniel started shutting doors. Not all doors, just the doors to rooms he was in when he didn't want Max in them, the office, the living room on evenings when he was watching something and didn't want company. Max would sit outside the closed door, and I would see him there from the hallway and feel something in me that I also wasn't examining closely enough. Month 7, there was an incident. Daniel described it as Max going for him. Max's version, which I trust considerably more, was that Daniel had reached towards something on the counter over Max's head, and Max had flinched and then given a warning. A short, low sound, no contact, a communication that meant, "That movement surprised me, and you should know I don't like it." A normal dog communication from a dog who was becoming increasingly uncomfortable in his own home. Daniel described it to me as an aggression incident. He used the word dangerous. He suggested that Max's behavior was escalating and that we needed to think about what we were going to do. I knew what he meant by think about. I didn't let him say it because I was not going to have that conversation. And then came the night. It was the 3rd week of November. The rain had started in the afternoon. The cold, determined kind of November rain that settles in like it owns the season and makes everything it touches gray and heavy. I had taken Max for a walk in the early evening, both of us getting thoroughly wet, and we had come home and I had toweled him off at the door, and he had done the post-walk shake that redistributed the remaining moisture across about 6 square feet of entryway, which was normal and which I dealt with normally. Daniel was in the living room. He watched us come in with the expression he had developed over the past several months for the arrival of Max. Not hostile exactly, but assessing. Calculating the disruption level. "Keep him in the kitchen tonight," Daniel said, not asked. Said. "He's fine," I said. "He's wet." "He's been toweled off. He'll dry." Maya. The tone that was not quite a request and not quite a command, something in between that I had been letting pass for months without naming. "He's staying in the living room," I said. I kept my voice even. I had been keeping my voice even for 7 months, and it was taking a toll I hadn't fully accounted for. Daniel said nothing more. He went back to the television. Max came and sat beside me on the couch, and Daniel moved to the armchair across the room, which was what he did now. The geometry of our evenings had reorganized itself around Max's position without anyone formally deciding on it. I noticed this. I noticed the shape of what the evenings had become. I didn't say anything. I didn't know this would change everything. I went to shower at 9:30. Max was on the couch. Daniel was on his phone in the armchair. The television was on. Everything looked like a normal evening. I was in the shower for maybe 15 minutes. I came out into the bedroom to get dressed, and I heard something that took me a moment to process. The particular sound of rain that is louder than it should be from inside the house. Like a door was open somewhere. I went to the hallway. The front door was closed, but I heard Max. Outside, not barking. Max rarely barked without reason. Something different. A sound that was in between a whine and a low, urgent sound. The sound he made when he was at a door he needed to get through. I went to the front door. I opened it. Max was on the front step. Soaking. The rain was coming down steadily, and he'd been out there long enough to be thoroughly wet again, his fur dark and flattened, looking up at me with an expression that contained more things than I was prepared to receive in one look: confusion and patience, and the specific expression of a dog who has been placed outside by someone and doesn't understand why, but is waiting anyway, because waiting at the door is what he knows how to do. I got him inside. I wrapped him in the hall towel. And then I stood in the entryway with my arms around my wet dog, and I processed what had happened. Daniel had put him outside while I was in the shower, in the rain, on the front step, in November. In 15 minutes, while I was unavailable, he had picked up my dog and put him outside in the dark and the rain and closed the door. I stood in the entryway for a long moment. The rain was loud against the windows. Max was leaning against me with his wet weight and his enormous patience. And then I walked into the living room. I want to be precise about this conversation because it matters. Daniel was still on his phone. He looked up when I came in, registered Max, who was beside me, still damp, and his expression went through a rapid recalibration before settling on something that was preparing to be reasonable. "Why was he outside?" I said. "He was whining," Daniel said. "He was bothering me. I put him out for some air." "In the rain." "He's a dog. Dogs don't care about rain." "You put him outside in the dark in a rainstorm while I was in the shower." I heard my own voice. It was completely even, more even than it had been for 7 months of keeping it even. "You put my dog outside while I was unavailable to stop you." "You're making it." "He was on the front step," I said. "Not the backyard, not the covered porch. The front step, with the porch light off." Daniel put his phone down. He had the expression now of someone who has been caught doing something and is deciding how to characterize it. "He was inside all day. He needed to—" "Stop," I said. He stopped. "I want you to think very carefully about what you just did," I said. "You waited for me to be in the shower, and you put my dog outside in the rain because you didn't want him in the room with you. You chose a 15-minute window when you knew I wouldn't know." I paused. That's not discipline. That's not a difference of opinion about pets. That's something else. Daniel was quiet. The quality of his quiet was the quality of someone who is running calculations. "I'm going to bed," I said. "Max is coming with me. We'll talk in the morning." I did not sleep well. Max slept beside me with his head on the pillow and his warm weight against my side, and I lay in the dark, and I thought about 7 months of accommodations and closed doors, and the geometry of the evenings and the word dangerous, and a dog on a front step in the rain, and I let myself look at the thing I hadn't been looking at. What happened next still haunts me. At some point in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock maybe, or closer to 3, Max got up. I registered this in the light sleep way I always registered his movements at night. He moved off the bed, which he always did smoothly, carefully, with a physical awareness of the space around him. And he went to the bedroom door. The door was cracked. He nosed it open and went into the hallway. Normal. He sometimes needed water in the night or a brief patrol of the house. I waited for him to come back. He didn't. After a few minutes, I got up. The hallway was dark. I could hear rain still, less heavy now, a steady, diminished sound against the windows. I went to the hallway and looked toward the living room. The house was quiet and dark except for the faint ambient light from the street coming through the curtains. Max was at the door to Daniel's office. He was not scratching. He was not making sound. He was standing very still in the hallway outside the office door, which was slightly ajar, with his nose at the gap, his body absolutely still in the specific posture he had when he was reading information from a smell. I watched him for a moment. Border Collies have extraordinary noses. This is not unique to Border Collies. All dogs have extraordinary noses, but the Border Collie brain applies that information differently, processes and files it with the systematic organization of an animal that is built to assess everything in its environment. Max stood at that door, and he looked at me over his shoulder. The look that meant, "Come here." The specific, deliberate, "I need you to look at this" look. I went to the door. I pushed it open. Daniel wasn't in the office. The office was Daniel's space, the room he used for work, for phone calls, for the various activities of his professional life. He was meticulous about it in a way he wasn't meticulous about the shared spaces of the house. His desk was organized with a precision that I had always read as professionalism. Max went to the desk. He put his nose to the surface, a behavior I would normally correct, but something in his focus made me wait. He sniffed along the edge of the desk toward the far side, where a stack of papers sat beside the closed laptop. He looked at me, looked at the papers, looked at me. I went to the desk. I looked at the papers. On top of the stack was an open notebook, the kind Daniel used for notes during work calls, a habit he'd mentioned as preferring to typing. The notebook was open to a page of handwritten notes. I could read them from where I stood. They were not work notes. I won't reproduce what I read in its entirety because some of it belongs to a private reckoning that I've already had and don't need to relitigate here. But what was clear, what was immediately, unambiguously clear from what was written on that page, was that Daniel had been conducting a financial arrangement with a property that he had described to me as something different from what it actually was. I had given him money, not a small amount, contributed toward what he'd told me was a shared investment opportunity he'd brought me in on as a partner. The notes in the notebook described that investment in terms that did not match what he had told me at all, in any way that could be reconciled. I stood in the office in the dark with the rain on the windows, and I read those notes 3 times to make sure I was understanding what I was reading. And then I looked at Max, who was sitting beside the desk watching me with those sharp brown eyes. He had brought me to this room. He had gotten off the bed at 2 in the morning and gone to this door and waited for me to follow him and shown me exactly where to look. The thing about border collies, the thing about dogs with that specific kind of intelligence, is that they track information in the environment with a comprehensiveness that humans can't match. They know when routines change. They know when things are where they don't belong. They know when the energy of a space is different from usual, and they register it and file it and hold it until it becomes relevant. Max had smelled something on that desk, or he had seen something, or he had perceived the change in the room's energy when Daniel had been doing something in there that he didn't want observed. I don't know the exact mechanism. I know the result. He led me to the room at 2 in the morning and he showed me where to look. And what I found there was the answer to a question I hadn't fully known I was asking. I took photographs, methodically with my phone, in the darkness of the office with the flashlight function on. Every page of the notebook that was relevant, the papers beneath it which I went through carefully. There were documents in there, printed emails, a contract that I recognized because a version of it had been shown to me, though not this version. The version I'd been shown had different numbers. I was in the office for 45 minutes. Max sat by the door the whole time, watchful, present, a calm and steady witness to what I was doing. When I was done, I went back to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone, and I looked at the photographs I had taken, and I let myself understand what they meant fully and completely, without the softening that happens when you love someone and want things to be different from how they are. Daniel had misrepresented the investment to me. He had given me documentation that had been altered. The amount I had given him, which I had understood to be entering a mutual investment with returns that would benefit both of us, had gone somewhere that the notebook did not fully explain, but the printed emails began to illuminate. There were conversations with a third party. there was a structure I was not part of that I had thought I was part of. I had been deceived, financially, deliberately, by a man who was sleeping in the next room. I sat with this for a long time. Max lay beside me with his head on my leg, and I put my hand on his back and felt the steady, even rise and fall of his breathing. And I thought about 7 months of a dog watching someone with careful eyes and not warming to them no matter how much time passed. I thought about what it means to know something you can't fully articulate. I thought about closing doors and front steps in the rain, and a dog getting off a bed at 2 a.m. and leading me exactly where I needed to go. I didn't know this would change everything. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the dark and I made plans, which is what I do when I'm angry enough to be calm. Morning came gray and wet, the rain lighter but still present. Daniel came to the kitchen at 7:30 with the careful energy of someone who'd been doing his own calculating overnight. He had a version of the morning conversation prepared. I could tell by the way he moved, the way he set up the coffee, the slight over-naturalness of his casual. He started with the dog. He started with an apology, practiced, specific enough to sound genuine, positioned as a concession that set up the larger point he was building toward. He was sorry about last night. He'd overreacted, but he wanted to talk about a longer-term solution because the reality was that the dog situation. "I spoke to a lawyer this morning," I said. He stopped. At 6 a.m., I called a friend who is an attorney. I explained the situation and sent her the photographs I took last night. She's already started looking at what my options are. The color of Daniel's face did a specific thing. Not dramatic, not the theatrical blanching of movies. More subtle, a change of quality. The change of someone whose calculations have just encountered new information. "Photographs," he said. "Of your notebook," I said. "And the documents, and the emails." Silence. "I know what you did," I said. "I know what the money actually went to. I have it documented." I paused. "I want you out of my house by noon." "Maya." "By noon," I said. "I'm going to be here, and Max is going to be here. And if you're not gone by noon, I'm going to make phone calls I'd prefer not to make today." Max was beside me. He had been beside me since I came into the kitchen, in the specific position he took when he was oriented toward me. Body angled, eyes forward, available, present in the way of someone who understands that their presence is necessary. Daniel looked at Max, and something in his face, underneath the calculation, underneath the performance of a man trying to locate his footing, collapsed into something more honest than I had seen from him in months. "I was going to pay it back," he said. "I know that's what you were going to say," I said. "I was. Things got difficult, and I needed the—" "I know what happened," I said. "I read the notebook. You can explain it to my lawyer if you want to explain it." He left by 11:15. I sat on the couch after his car pulled out of the driveway, and I looked at my house, which was, I realized, exactly that. My house. It had always been my house. I had been the one paying the rent for 4 years before he arrived. In the 7 months of his living there, the balance of whose space it was had quietly shifted in his direction, and I had accommodated that shift piece by piece in the way that you accommodate things you're not examining closely enough. Max put his head in my lap. I put both hands on his face and I looked at him, his brown eyes steady and warm and paying full attention the way he always paid full attention. and I felt the specific quality of emotion that doesn't have a clean name. Not happiness, not yet. Something more like recognition, like seeing something clearly that you'd been looking at sideways for too long. You knew, I told him. Not a question. He blinked. You've known for months, I said. Another blink. His tail moved once, slowly. I should have listened earlier, I said. He put one paw on my knee. His version of, I know. It's okay. I cried for about 20 minutes, which was the appropriate amount of time given the circumstances, and Max sat through all of it with the patient, sturdy presence of someone who understands that sometimes people need to cry for 20 minutes, and the right response is simply to stay. I called my friend Priya, who was the attorney, and she had by then reviewed everything I'd sent her and had a clear picture of what had happened and what my options were. She was efficient and calm, and when she was done outlining the options, she said, "How did you find the notebook?" "My dog led me to it," I said. A pause. "At 2 a.m. "Yes." Another pause. "Maya, that dog just saved you from a much worse situation." "I know," I said. "Much worse. If this had gone on for another few months." "I know," I said again. I thought about what it would have looked like if Max had not gotten off the bed at 2 a.m, if I had not followed him, if I had not pushed open the office door and looked at what he wanted me to look at. How much longer the version of things I'd thought was real might have continued. How much further in I might have gotten before the collapse. He had ended it in the rain at 11:15 on a Tuesday morning. Because of a dog who'd been put outside on a front step at 9 o'clock the previous night and had used the 4 hours between those events to show me what I needed to see. My mother came over that afternoon. I had called her after Daniel left, and she'd been in her car within 10 minutes, which is exactly who my mother is. She came in, and she looked at the space where Daniel had been, at the subtly emptier closet in the bedroom, at the absence of his things from the bathroom counter. And she sat down at my kitchen table, and she was quiet for a moment in the way of someone assembling the correct response to something they're still processing. "He's been gone for 2 hours, she said. "Tell me everything." I told her everything. The rain, the front step, getting up at 2. Max at the door, the notebook, the photographs, the call to Priya at 6 a.m. She listened with the focused attention of a woman who had been a mother for 30 years and had developed the specific skill of hearing everything in the right sequence before she responded. When I was done, she said, "He put Max outside in the rain." "Yes." "While you were in the shower?" "Yes." She shook her head. One slow, deliberate shake. "That's when I would have known," she said. "The moment I heard that, that would have been the moment." "He thought I wouldn't find out until morning," I said. "Instead, you found out at 2 a.m. because Max woke you up," she said. "More or less." She looked at Max, who was in his spot near the kitchen door, watching us with those even, warm eyes. My mother and Max had always had a good relationship. She was one of the people he had decided immediately were safe, and she had always given him the kind of easy, relaxed energy that dogs read as trustworthy. "Good boy," she told him, quietly, with the specificity of someone saying something they mean. Max's tail moved. "Good, smart, brave boy," she said. "What happened with Daniel, legally, I'm not going to detail completely here, because it belongs to a part of my life that I've processed and moved past, and that was never the point of this story. What I'll tell you is that Priya was effective, and the situation was resolved in a way that was better than it might have been if it had continued undetected. Not perfect, not without cost, in money, in time, in the particular exhaustion of realizing that someone you trusted was operating with a different agenda, but resolved. I changed the locks on the house the day after he left. I repainted the office, which was my way of taking a room back. I moved Max's bed into the bedroom in the spot he'd always chosen anyway, which was something I had been de facto permitting for years and which I now made formally official by buying him an expensive orthopedic bed that he immediately abandoned in favor of sleeping directly on my feet. I took him to the park on that Saturday, the first weekend after, and I watched him run with the full extension of a border collie in open space, which is one of the more beautiful things I've seen, and I thought about what the past 4 days had cost and what they had given back and which of those things was larger. The giving back was larger by a significant amount, not because of the resolution of the legal situation, because of the clarity, because of what it felt like to be in my own house in the evenings without the careful geometry of arranged distances. Because of what it felt like to come home and have Max run to the door and not have to immediately calculate whose space I was walking into. What happened next still sits with me, but differently than the bad things sit with you. It sits with me the way things sit with you when they've reorganized something important. Max is 7 years old now. He has all the things a 7-year-old border collie mix has, a slightly calmer energy than the first years, a deeper, settled quality, the specific confidence of an animal who knows exactly where it is and who it belongs to. His eyes are the same. Brown, warm, paying attention with the comprehensive thoroughness that has always been his particular quality. He sleeps on the orthopedic bed that he's decided is acceptable 2 nights out of 5, and directly on my feet the other 3. I have stopped having opinions about this. My mother visits on Sundays and she always speaks to Max first when she comes in, which is a habit she developed in the weeks after that November and has never abandoned. She brings him things. The specific treats she knows he likes, which she researched with the thoroughness of a grandmother buying things for a grandchild. She does not find this disproportionate. Neither do I. Priya has met Max twice, and both times she has greeted him with the specific warmth of someone who knows what he did and hasn't forgotten it. The detective, she calls him. Max accepts this title with appropriate dignity. I am not with anyone right now, by choice rather than circumstance, and I find that the quiet of the house, the real quiet, not the managed tension quiet, is something I don't want to interrupt until I'm sure that what I'm letting in is worth the space it takes. I think about the things that night cost me and the things it gave me. It cost me an illusion I'd been maintaining at increasing effort. It cost me the specific grief of discovering that someone you chose was not who you thought they were. It cost me money and time and a period of trusting my own judgment that I had to rebuild carefully. It gave me my house back. It gave me evenings without geometry. It gave me a clarity about what I'm willing to accommodate and what I'm not that I didn't have before November and that I've had every day since. And it gave me something else, something harder to name but more important than any of the specific practical things. It gave me the experience of being known, not performed for, not managed, not observed by someone calculating what to present to me. Known. By a dog who had been watching everything for 7 months with those brown eyes and who, on a rainy November night, decided that the time for watching was over and the time for acting was now, who got off a bed at 2 in the morning and went to a door and waited for me to follow him and led me exactly where I needed to go. That is what love looks like when it's not performing. That is what it looks like when someone who loves you decides that your well-being is more important than their comfort, when they don't hedge or calculate or wait to see which way things are going, when they just go to the door and look at you over their shoulder and wait for you to trust them. I think about the night sometimes in a very specific way. I think about the 11 minutes between me going into the shower and coming out to find Max outside in the rain. 11 minutes in which Daniel made a calculation that he could create a fact, that by morning the story could be managed, that the dog was a problem he could temporarily solve while I was unavailable. He miscalculated in 2 ways. He miscalculated me, which he'd been doing for months, and he miscalculated Max, which everyone always does because they look at a dog and they see a dog and they don't see what's actually there. What's actually there in a dog like Max, in any dog who has been loved into security and has directed that security outward into the work of caring for the person they love, is something so far past what most people think when they think pet that the word almost fails to carry it. It's loyalty that has no agenda, attention that has no calculation, love that has no performance. He was put outside in the rain and he stood on the front step and he waited for me to come to the door. And when I brought him in, he leaned against me with his wet weight, and he let me towel him off, and then he slept next to me. And at 2 o'clock, he got up and he went to a door, and he waited for me to follow him. He never barked. He never made a scene. He never did anything that you could point to as dramatic or extraordinary on its surface. He just went to the door and he looked at me, and he waited. And that was enough. That was everything. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And tell me, has your dog or cat ever shown you something you needed to see in a way you didn't expect? Has an animal ever steered you away from something without you fully understanding what was happening until later? I want to hear those stories, because they are some of the most important stories I know. And if you believe that the animals who love us deserve to be listened to, that their watchfulness and their knowing and their 2 a.m. urgency at a door means something real, subscribe to this channel and turn on the notifications. We tell these stories every week. The ones about dogs and cats and the extraordinary things they do for the people they love in the quiet way that real loyalty always operates. Go home and look at your dog tonight. Notice what they're noticing. Follow them when they want you to follow them. They might be trying to show you something you need to see. They usually are. This story was inspired by and adapted from real-life experiences. Some names, details, and specific circumstances have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. The rain on the front step, the brown eyes at 2 in the morning, the specific way a dog looks at you when he needs you to follow him, that is as true as anything I've written.